Air France Flight 07 was a scheduled charter flight carrying passengers from Paris-Orly Airport to Atlanta, Georgia on June 3, 1962. The aircraft, a Boeing 707-328, was operated by Air France and was carrying 132 people on board, including 10 crew members and 122 passengers, most of whom were members of an Atlanta-based civic group returning from a European tour. Tragically, just moments after takeoff, the aircraft failed to gain sufficient altitude, suffered a tail strike, and crashed back onto the runway before bursting into flames. Of the 132 people on board, only 2 flight attendants survived, making it one of the deadliest aviation accidents of its time. The Boeing 707 was one of the most advanced jet airliners of the era, known for its reliability and performance. However, like any aircraft, it required precise handling during takeoff, particularly with regard to pitch angle and thrust management. The takeoff phase is one of the most critical moments in any flight, as the aircraft must achieve sufficient lift while maintaining the correct balance between speed and angle of ascent. Any miscalculation during this phase can lead to catastrophic consequences, as was tragically demonstrated in this accident. The events leading up to the crash began as Flight 007 prepared for departure from Orly Airport, one of France's busiest international airports. The aircraft had undergone routine checks and no mechanical issues were reported prior to takeoff. The flight crew, consisting of experienced Air France pilots, was responsible for ensuring a smooth and safe departure. The weather conditions were clear, with no significant winds or visibility issues that would have affected the takeoff. However, as the aircraft accelerated down the runway, something went terribly wrong. As the Boeing 707 reached its takeoff speed, the nose of the aircraft began to lift off the ground. However, almost immediately the tail of the plane struck the runway, causing sparks and damage to the underside of the fuselage. A tail strike occurs when the aircraft's pitch angle is too high during rotation, causing the rear section of the fuselage to scrape against the runway surface. This type of incident can be extremely dangerous, as it can lead to structural damage, loss of control, or in some cases, engine failure due to debris being ingested into the engines. In the case of Flight 007, the tail strike was severe enough to affect the aircraft's ability to climb properly. Instead of gaining altitude smoothly, the aircraft struggled to lift off, barely clearing the ground. The pilots, realizing the situation was critical, attempted to correct the pitch angle and apply full power to the engines. However, by this point, one of the aircraft's 4 engines had begun to lose thrust, possibly due to debris ingestion or structural damage caused by the tail strike. With one engine failing and the aircraft already in a compromised position, the situation quickly became uncontrollable. The Boeing 707, unable to climb effectively, started to lose stability. The pilots desperately tried to gain altitude, but the aircraft was already too low and too slow to recover. Within seconds, Flight 007 crashed back onto the runway, skidding along the tarmac before bursting into flames. The impact was catastrophic, with the fuselage breaking apart and igniting into a massive fireball that consumed the majority of the aircraft. Rescue crews at Orly Airport responded immediately, but the intense fire made it nearly impossible to reach the wreckage in time to save most of the passengers. Of the 132 people on board, only 2 flight attendants, seated near the rear of the aircraft, survived the crash. These 2 individuals managed to escape before the fire completely engulfed the wreckage, but they suffered severe injuries. The remaining passengers and crew were trapped inside the burning aircraft with no chance of survival. The aftermath of the crash left investigators searching for answers. The French aviation authorities, along with Boeing and Air France, launched a full-scale investigation to determine the exact causes of the accident. The primary focus was on the sequence of events that led to the tail strike and subsequent engine failure. Early findings pointed to a combination of pilot error and possible mechanical issues that may have contributed to the disaster. One of the key factors identified was the incorrect rotation technique used during takeoff. It was determined that the pilot in command had pulled back on the control column too sharply, causing the aircraft's nose to rise too quickly and resulting in the tail strike. Proper takeoff procedures require a gradual increase in pitch angle to prevent excessive drag and structural damage. The abrupt nose-up motion not only caused the tail strike, but also reduced the effectiveness of the aircraft's lift, making it more difficult for the plane to achieve a stable climb. Additionally, the investigation examined the engine failure that occurred shortly after takeoff. While it was unclear whether the engine failure was a direct result of the tail strike, the possibility of debris ingestion or structural stress impacting the engine's performance was considered likely. The Boeing 707 was designed to operate with one engine out, but given the low altitude and compromised takeoff, the failure of even a single engine significantly reduced the pilot's ability to recover. The final accident report concluded that pilot error was the primary cause of the crash, with the tail strike being the critical event that set off the chain reaction leading to the disaster. The findings emphasized the importance of proper takeoff procedures and the need for rigorous pilot training in handling emergency situations. As a result of the crash, aviation authorities implemented stricter guidelines for takeoff rotation techniques and improved training programs for pilots to prevent similar accidents in the future. The crash of Air France Flight 007 was a devastating event that deeply impacted both the aviation industry and the families of the victims. The majority of the passengers were members of an influential civic organization from Atlanta, Georgia, who had been touring Europe as part of a cultural exchange program. The loss of so many prominent community members was a significant tragedy, leaving a lasting mark on the city of Atlanta and beyond. In response to the disaster, Air France reviewed its operational procedures and pilot training programs, ensuring that all pilots were thoroughly trained in proper takeoff techniques and emergency response protocols. The airline also worked closely with Boeing to address any potential design concerns related to takeoff performance and tail strike prevention. In the broader aviation industry, the crash of Flight 007 reinforced the importance of strict adherence to takeoff procedures and the potential dangers of pilot-induced errors. The accident served as a case study in aviation safety, leading to improvements in training and flight operations that would benefit future generations of pilots and passengers. While the memories of the victims of Flight 007 remain, their tragic loss was not in vain. The lessons learned from this accident contributed to the ongoing efforts to make air travel safer and prevent similar disasters from occurring in the future. Every aviation accident, no matter how devastating, serves as an opportunity to improve safety standards and ensure that the mistakes of the past are not repeated.